The town of Liberty gathered at the courthouse that morning. A crowd of farmers, traders and ranch owners pressed together under a pale sky. A small cabin and about 12 acres, nothing grand, were up for auction. When the auctioneer called for bids, the hush that followed felt almost like a verdict. No one moved. Then Gideon Hale, a worn rancher with dust in the seams of his clothes, raised his hand and bid 12 cents. Heads turned, not with envy, but with pity, as if they watched a man step willingly into ruin. The gavel fell. The cabin was his. On the ride home, Gideon felt the weight of those eyes behind him. The property looked like a bargain, only from a distance a sagging gate, a weathered barn, and a house whose windows had been boarded for years. When he drew close, something at the gate stopped him cold. A woman hung from the crossbeam, big, broader than anyone he'd seen, muscles like a fighter's, her face streaked with blood and dust. For a moment Gideon thought she was dead. Then he cut her loose. Her body came down with a dull thud, heavy enough to force him back. He had handled wild bulls and tired horses, but this was different. Her frame carried a strength that made his knees ache. He ripped a strip from his shirt and wrapped the rope burn at her throat, then bent to water her cracked lips. Slowly, painfully, she breathed. She could not speak much English, but one battered word slipped out clear as a bell: danger. Gideon's ribs tightened. He dragged her into the cabin, set her on a rough table, and covered her with an old blanket. The place smelled of ash and neglect, but someone had been here not long ago. The more Gideon looked at her, the more a rumor he'd once heard in a trading post filled in the shape of this stranger's story. Nellie, granddaughter of Chief White Hawk, tall as the legends, a warrior bloodline. Why she'd been strung up at his gate, he could not say. Who would do such a thing, and why he could not want to find out. That evening, as the sunset chased long shadows across the plain, Gideon rode into Liberty for medicine and bandages. The general store fell silent when he walked through the door, as if his boots dragged bad luck behind them. He bought what he needed, then heard the back door swing and a voice glide into the room. Smooth, polished, and dangerous. A man in a silver-brimmed hat introduced himself as Fletcher Knox. He dropped a leather pouch on the counter with a thud. Coins chimed inside. $500, he said. Take it and forget what you'd found for 12 cents. Gideon looked at the pouch as if it were tainted. He had paid 12 cents for the cabin. No amount would make him hand it over. Fletcher's offer was less an offer than an order. The town knew the score. People glanced away. Men like Fletcher were the hired teeth of something larger. Gideon left with his supplies and an uneasy sense that anything in that cabin, anything left buried beneath its floorboards, was dangerous enough to kill for. Back home, the rope marks at the gate told a story of cruelty. Nellie had not been merely abused, she'd been meant to serve as a message. When she woke, her dark eyes were fierce, not fragile. She told Gideon, through clipped words and a few halting sentences, that she was taken to force her tribe into surrender. Samuel Hartwell, the cabin's former owner, had discovered forged land papers, proof that traders, judges, and even men in high places had conspired to steal tribal lands. He tried to expose them and was killed. The papers were said to be hidden here. Gideon pushed the image of the town beside him, how everyone had watched and done nothing, and felt something harden in his chest. He had come looking for a quiet spot to nurse his thin herd. Now the cabin had become a crossroads between cowardice and conscience. He would not give in. That night sounds came from the edge of the tree's horses, the unmistakable rhythm of riders. Fletcher's men circled the property like wolves. When they called Gideon out, taunting him, promising his life and demanding the chest, he stepped onto the porch, rifle steady. Beside him Nally rose, wrapped in a blanket but enormous and unbowed. The men hesitated, the image of someone they had left for dead, now standing in defiance, unnerved them. Gunfire split the night. Splinters flew as bullets chewed through the cabin's siding. Gideon ducked, pushed Nellie down and returned fire, while she, though weak, took the revolver he'd given her and shot true. For every man that fell at the gate, a piece of the story hardened into a vow. They would not make a grave of that place. As the attackers set fire to the fence and shouted for the cabin to be burned, a low horn answered from the prairie, a sound that felt older than the town's law. Figures appeared on the horizon, White Hawk's warriors, a wall of riders and spears cutting through the smoke. The hired guns faltered. Terror spread through them faster than gun smoke. Fletcher tried to finish the job in a desperate charge, but the Apache thunder swallowed the hired men and the fight tipped. Dawn came streaked with ash. The cabin still smoldered, buckets of water cooling the worst of the flames. Bodies lay where courage had met greed. Chief White Hawk, silver hair glinting, embraced Nali as if to make whole what had been broken. Together with Gideon they set to work tearing up the floorboards. Beneath a sealed patch of planks, there was an iron chest and a leather pouch. Inside were scrolls, deeds, ledgers and stamped government papers. Judge William Crane's signature on some, Governor Marcus Webb's stamp on others. Records of bribes, forged transfers, buyers who had paid handsomely for land they had no right to own. The scope of the corruption was jaw-dropping. Hartwell had discovered enough to topple more than one man. He had found an entire chain of theft that crawled through 3 counties. Gideon felt the risk of that knowledge press on him. If the men who'd profited from those lies would burn a cabin and hang a woman to keep quiet, they would fight to the last to bury the evidence, and anyone who knew it. They took the chest to the territorial marshal. The papers ignited a reaction that swept the region. Within days, arrests were made. Governor Webb and his accomplices were marched in chains. Judge Crane and others who had fattened themselves on stolen land were exposed. The 3 counties trembled as the network of corruption was pulled apart, strand by strand. The cabin that had brought Gideon nothing but pity for the 12 cents he'd paid became something else, a symbol. Where a noose had once hung, a wooden sign was later nailed into the gatepost with a single, simple word: freedom. People told the story as one of those unlikely moments when an ordinary person chooses to act. Gideon, a quiet rancher who could have walked away, who instead cut a rope and, by doing so, saved a life and helped unmask a theft that had stolen generations of land. Years later, the porch light sometimes still burned late into the prairie night. Gideon sat there, older and quieter, with Naley at his side. When the wind whispered through the grass, the cabin no longer stood for misfortune. It held the memory of a choice, that justice often begins with a small, stubborn act, an unwillingness to look away.